ND filters. What are they? What do they do? And do you need to be using them as a DJI drone flyer? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's get started. Yes folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing off some new ND filters I picked up off Amazon. We'll be looking into whether they're actually worth it, whether they make a blind bit of difference, or whether you'd be better off spending that money elsewhere. Now, I am doing quite a bit of DJI Mini 2 content around here, so please consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more. Very briefly, just going to interrupt outside me, and I will be quick because it's going to get cold out there, but I do want to just go over the particular set of ND filters I chose and why I did so. I'll leave a link to these ones down in the description, but in all honesty, I chose these mostly because they happened to be in stock when I made my purchase, and they did have fairly decent reviews. And I selected the 5-pack, but they are also available as a 6-pack. The reason I went for the 5-pack, 3 reasons in fact. First of all, a little bit cheaper. Second of all, they come with an ND4 filter, the 6-pack does not. And third of all of these are polarized, which should provide a little bit more saturation when we record our video with the drone. All of the ND filters are nicely slotted inside. You can see this is actually the 6-pack case that they've used, but it still does the job. And from your left to right, we've got the ND4 filter, the 8, the 16, the 32, and a 64 as well, which will probably not get any use, but it's there for super, super bright conditions. Now, right at this moment, we don't have any ND filters attached, and I'm just going to speed up the garden here before we get some height so I can get a feel for the drone. Now, as I say, right now we're not using any ND filters, so this is just the standard picture in auto exposure mode. And what the ND filters are going to allow you to do is actually drop the auto exposure mode and start playing around with the exposure settings in a way that is actually meaningful. And I am looking forward to this British lockdown ending so I can actually take you some other places. Gosh, you guys must be getting so sick of seeing the woodland around my property here. Right, let's get into the air then. And yeah, 55 meters should be absolutely fine. Now, as you can see at the moment, we are looking through the image with an auto exposure setting, and that is just the standard default setting, of course, for this drone. And it does a pretty good job, okay? It does a pretty good job. But the problem with using auto exposure and with no ND filter, theoretically, basically you're not going to get that cinematic video that you're going to probably want. You're not going to get as much motion blur, and depending on the light, the footage is going to be quite a bit grainier than you otherwise would like. We should be okay at this particular temperament, but you know, it can happen. So these are some of the issues that having an ND filter should solve, and they effectively work by stopping the amount of color and light that can make its way through to the lens. So they are effectively controlling the exposure, if you like, directly on the lens itself. So yeah, what I'm going to do now, first of all, take a glove off so I can actually press the phone controls. Tastes lovely. Right, you go over there. Let's just turn around so we can see more of the city in the background, the forest down here, or the woods I should say, not quite big enough to be a forest. Nothing that exciting around here. Go to the auto exposure setting, which I've just locked, did not mean to do that. But as you can see on manual, the image isn't looking too bad. Now, what I want to do is drop the shutter down. You effectively want to have the shutter speed to about double your FPS. So if you're recording at 24 frames per second, then you want to try and get the shutter as close to 48, 1/48 as possible. The only thing is the DJI Mini 2 doesn't have a 48 setting for the shutter, so you might have to set the shutter speed to about 50 if you are going for that 24 frames per second cinematic look. But I'm currently recording in 4K 30, which means we want to try and change the shutter setting to 1/60. And when I do that, you can see the image is, well, it's very bright. So let's go ahead and record again so we can get an actual image here. The image is bright because there's no lens filter. So there's a heck of a lot of light getting in through the lens. And because of that slower shutter speed, we're not able to compensate. And so we're getting a little bit more brightness than we would otherwise like. Now, on an even sunnier day, it's very cloudy today and it's getting quite late in the afternoon, the effect here, the exposure effect, would be even worse. In fact, if I just go ahead and drop the overexposure warning on here, you can see immediately that we're getting a lot of areas, especially in the sky, that are extremely overexposed. So what we're going to do now, just make sure we take a couple of pano shots here. Go a little bit slower so that we can really take in the scenery. And once we've got a good overview of the sky, depending on the angle of the sun and stuff, we'll bring the drone back and then get it back in the air with an ND filter attached and just see what kind of difference it's making. By the way, the ISO, you want to try and keep that on 100. At least that's what I've read, so that's what I'm doing. You see that that says plus 1.3? You want to try and get that to 0, but that will happen automatically depending on your shutter speed, your ISO, and whatever filter, ND filter or not, that you may be using. So the closer that is to 0, then the best look you're going to get from your footage. Okay, there we have it. Oh great, missed. Ended up shaving some of the leaves. There you go. Hopefully you folks can just about see that. We've got the ND8 filter now set up, ready to go. I should probably also show how to actually attach these things to your drone. A little bit fiddly, especially when you're trying to do so on camera, but once you get used to it, it's not so bad. First things first, a little bit obvious, but I should say it, make sure your drone is switched off. If it's not, then the gimbal is going to try and move all over the place. You're going to end up doing damage to it. These things are delicate, you know, on the best of days, so be very careful how you handle it. I'm a little bit nervous, as you can see, since this is one of my first times doing so. Now, you can see at the back here, there is the ventilation, and what we're going to be doing is using that to hook the ND filter into. So I'm going to recommend standing the drone up on a flat surface so that you can leverage it a little bit easier, and make sure that the gimbal is pointed as far down as possible. You can see, if I can try and angle this, there's a couple of very small hooks at the back of the ND filter. We're going to be using those to attach into the ventilation. Now, I am trying to do this whilst also giving you the best view of what I'm doing, which makes it a little bit trickier. But with the gimbal in the low position, we're just going to rest the ND filter on top there, making sure that those hooks do capture in the vent. It's very important that once you've got that connected correctly, that you do just push down on the filter to make sure that it is well and truly attached. And it doesn't take much force, you know, like I say, you do need to be careful with this thing. It will go into place, but just make sure that it has done so. Once it's on properly, it's not going to be going anywhere, not until you want to take it off. And doing that is pretty much the same process, but obviously just in reverse. So you might just want to grab hold of the gimbal from the sides with one hand, just to keep it steady. And what I find best is to maybe use like the nail of a finger just at the back there where it's hooked in, with some other fingers just on the other side of the filter in order to pinch that off. Just being careful not to apply too much pressure to the filter, because the metal is very thin and you don't want to bend it out of shape. But there we have it. That's how you apply and remove these ND filters to your drone. Straight away I can see that the value is down to -1.7. So it might be the case that this ND8 filter is a little bit too strong. Perhaps an ND4 would have been more appropriate. But let's go ahead, shall we? And again, get the drone off. We'll drop that gimbal down a bit. And I can definitely see that the ND filter is having an effect here. Perhaps a little bit too much of an effect. As I say, because it's cloudy, might be a little bit too strong with that ND8. So what I'm going to do is do a quick shot here, just as we did before, another pano shot. And then I'm going to bring the drone back as quick as I can, because I don't want it to start getting dark at this time, which it will. And we'll see if we can drop an ND4 filter into place. And maybe we can get that value a little bit closer to 0, which is really what we're aiming for. Yeah, remember, the brighter the day, the brighter the sky, the higher value ND filter you want to use. So I thought we'd get away with an ND8 here, but it looks like ND8 is still going to be more useful once you've got a little bit of sun, which we're kind of lacking right now. Okay, I'm just going to start bringing it back now. And then we'll get the ND4 filter in its place. Okay, one ND4 filter readily attached. Remember, by the way, that the 6-pack of these doesn't even come with an ND4 filter. Something just to bear in mind when deciding which of those packs to purchase. This pack is also £10 cheaper. Hey, I do just want to keep an eye on that battery life as well now that we're down to 47%. But once again, let's go for that low flying shot, start recording. And yeah, it does already look like the value is much closer to what we want it to be. Minus 0.7 there. And hopefully that'll get even closer to 0 as we get a little bit more height here. It's about 50 meters. Yeah, this is the lowest filter, numbered filter that we can use. And 1/60 shutter. ISO 100 still set. We'll just get that pano shot once more. And yeah, I'm sure this is going to look fantastic. We've got that overexposure warning there. Let's just lift it up to the sky so we can see that a little bit more clearly. That is directly, though, where the sun is. Okay, so I'm not surprised we're seeing that there. That is directly where the sun is. Awesome. What I want to do as well is just grab a couple of photos if I can, so I can see how it is sticking those through the Lightroom editing process with the ND filters being attached while those photos were taken. So maybe a shot here if I stop recording, and we'll just swap that over to photo there. Okay, let's go ahead and okay, I can see it's gone back to auto exposure. That's because of the fact that every setting on here, whether it's photo, video, pano, has its own independent settings. So let's change the shutter down to 60 again. Yeah, there we go. Incidentally, if you were filming in 60 FPS, you'd want to set that shutter speed to 120. So just remember to have it about double. Okay, we've got it to JPEG and RAW. Let's take some pictures here. Yeah, I think that's going to look rather smashing. And we'll take one of the woods as well. And let's just change that back to video. 4K, 30 FPS, just what we want. And we'll start bringing the drone home now, I think. We've got a good test of those two ND filters there, ND4 and ND8. I don't want to spend too much further amount of time out here because I'm getting cold, the drone's getting cold, and the battery level is dropping, and I don't want to take any chances. So let's bring it back and conclude. At last, an almost perfect landing. Oh, and one last thing I probably should have mentioned. These particular filters also work on the original DJI Mini. So they're for the Mini 1 and the Mini 2. But what do you think then, guys? Hopefully I've shown you some of the footage that was taken directly from the drone. Do you think it makes a difference being able to record and take photos with these ND filters and a manual adjustment of the shutter speed? Or do you think that it's probably not worth it? Now, I'm sure you guys are far more professional with your photography than I am. I'm just getting started here. I've seen some mixed comments about them online. So yeah, let me know your own thoughts. Don't forget to stay tuned to the channel for much more Mini 2 content to come. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, everybody.